ambitious policy proposal with an urgent call to action for local, state, and federal leaders on reforms that are needed to improve outcomes for Latinos in this country and to address the economic devastation caused by COVID-19. My name is Sonia Diaz, and I am the founding director of UCLA's Latino Policy and Politics Initiative. We were proud to host over 80 of California's leading Latino experts in charting a vision for meaningful reforms that address the specific challenges that communities of color face during the pandemic and the national conversation on racial injustice. Inspired by the movement for Black lives and committed to solidarity with their cause, we offer a blueprint to meaningfully include Latinos in recovery efforts that recognizes the unique challenges they face and their importance in the success of our state and our country. The Latino agenda calls for increased voter mobilization, the creation of a pipeline for the green jobs of the future, comprehensive immigration reform, the end of police abuse, and for assistance for undocumented residents who have been left out of relief and stimulus funding, among many other urgent calls for action. We are calling on our elected officials across the nation to embrace bold action to build a stronger, more just and inclusive future for all. Our Latino agenda will be shared with both presidential campaigns, the national political committees, and sectors, including philanthropy and education, to ensure that the needs of underserved communities are a focus during this election year. As Black and Brown communities continue to see devastating economic and health impacts from COVID-19 and the looming recession, we want to make clear that the future of this country is inextricably tied to the recovery of those most affected. The path forward must have a fair opportunity to survive and thrive for people of color, and anything less will stifle progress and put America further behind. Our agenda offers a clear roadmap towards an equitable recovery. As we kick off this press conference, a note to reporters that we will be taking questions at the end. Please sign up to be called on to speak in the chat box with your name and news outlet. I will be calling on you on the order that your requests were received. I'm happy to introduce next Assemblymember Lorena Gonzalez, Chair of the California Latino Legislative Caucus, to speak about our vision for racial and economic justice.
Thank you. Thank you, Sonia, and thank you for LPPI for convening what turned out to be just an incredible group of Latino leaders from throughout the state to act on the widespread disparities that we've always seen in our Latino community, but have been made worse during these times of COVID. And to lead us during these times of civil unrest, which has been bravely led by the Black Lives Matter movement, where we fit into that, where we can partner, where we can lead. As we look across our state and country, we've never had a agenda that brings us all together, clearly stating this is our Latino agenda. We hope that after today, people will learn and understand that just a little bit better. We need to address the economic inequities that we have in our society, starting right here in California. And we need to lead the way to ensure that nobody is left behind in this recovery as we were previously. It's time to come together to show through our leadership that in fact, we can have partnerships, of course, with the Black community and other ethnic communities, and we can ensure that our community is not left behind. I appreciate having an opportunity to take part in this and look forward to what's going to come out of this as well. We must move forward this agenda for recovery. It centers on racial and economic justice for our community. Thank you again to LPPI for organizing this and for bringing us all together.
Thank you so much, Chair Gonzalez. It's my great honor to next introduce Vice Chair of the California Latino Legislative Caucus, Senator Maria Elena Durazo.
Good morning. Thank you very much. And to my chair, Assemblymember Gonzalez, Sonia. I represent the district in Los Angeles, including Boyle Heights, East LA, all the way to Koreatown and East Hollywood. And of course, the Legislative Caucus represents districts all over California, rural, suburbs, big cities. Thank you, Sonia, and the team. I want to say that coordinating and capturing all our proposals into one succinct Latino agenda is been difficult, but a very exciting thing to do. And with little over 3 months left before the November presidential election, it's time that the Latino agenda gets pulled together with not only the needs, but what we think should be the response. At the core of this agenda are some really important pieces: equity, opportunity, civil and human rights. And yes, the Black Lives Matter movement has been an amazing part of California and the nation. We intentionally devoted, because of that, a portion of our agenda to Black and Brown unity, as well as other issues that are that are mutual to our communities: jobs, education, health. We have all these areas of focus in the final product. But with 40% of the population in California being Latino, we have much at stake. And that's why the timing of doing this before the November presidential elections is so important. I also want to explicitly acknowledge that our policy discussions have been about the entire Latino community, regardless of immigration status. Those are the members of our community that are disproportionately experiencing higher rates of poverty, rampant violations of workers' rights, wage theft in industries like the farm workers, like garment workers, domestic workers, truck drivers, wage theft, higher rates of tenant evictions, and widening digital divide. It's time in California to overturn Prop 209 and reinstate affirmative action. So I'm pleased to have been a part of this process. Thank you to everybody who worked so hard. And don't forget, we're still working on the census. Make sure we get counted and we need to vote. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Senator. Next, I want to introduce our other convening co-chair, Gonzalo de la Rocha, who is President and CEO of Ultimate Health Services. Gonzalo. Gonzalo, we're going to unmute you. I apologize.
There we go. 7 years after launching the Black Lives Matter movement, the movement has rightfully gained the support to lead and to real shift in policy and in democracy. Its objective was always relevant: to acknowledge the contributions and existence of Black individuals and to combat violence against the community. Since gaining partners in solidarity, its founders have strengthened the volume at which they shout the names of those who have been killed. The Black community has the support of the Latino community. We recognize that there's still work to be done to unite our communities and hope this agenda serves as another step to demonstrate our solidarity with Black Lives Matter. Both Black and Latino communities are subject to significant disparities in many areas, particularly in health outcomes. And we, not just Black and Brown communities, but all of us, must demand equity and break down the systematic racial barriers that stand in our way of our opportunities, social mobility, and our very existence. Black and Latino residents have been the hardest hit in COVID-19, and that's what prompted this particular forum. In Los Angeles County, Latinos in particular are at least twice as likely to contract the virus than white populations. Across the country, there are high numbers of Latinos in industries that Senator Durazo just outlined, agriculture, construction, manufacturing. These are the jobs where you have the minority populations concentrated. Those who make decisions about how and where we distribute our resources, the owners, public or private companies, absolutely must prioritize the health and safety of our workers. What is particularly critical to advancing our health outcomes is acknowledging the way so many focus areas overlap with one another. And we got to do something about them. We cannot fix health outcomes without looking at the health of our economy or the educational resources that affect the long-term economic health and opportunities of our communities. There's so many things that are their interaction with one another and affect one another. I'm not going to go into the list of that in the interest of time. There is great intersection among all the platforms on our agenda, as you would see. There has to be a productive decision-making process and action among leaders in all these industries. Creating another task force or group to study the problem or funding one or two minority organizations is not the answer. Our anger is too deep. We are sick and tired of inaction. Our Black and Brown contributions to this nation's economy was gladly accepted and has been gladly accepted historically, while our very existence is simultaneously rejected. It is critical that we act as allies in solidarity with the Black Lives Movement. We commit to become strong allies in the movement and acknowledge that we can do more to recognize the distinctions between and to support our efforts. In this agenda, we demand change in our communities. We are calling on political parties, business and civic leaders to invest in Latino communities at the local and national level. We encourage elected officials, business and civic leaders, and organizations to sign on to the list of policy recommendations to encourage action and policy changes in a time of urgency. And we demand that there is significant Black and Latino representation in decisions making around the distribution and the policies around COVID testing, treatment, and vaccinations to ensure that our communities are not left behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gonzalo. Next, we have Mr. Thomas Saenz, President and General Counsel of the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund.
Thank you, Sonia, and good morning, everyone. As President and General Counsel of MALDEF, I am pleased to join my colleagues and to echo the importance of this policy agenda. Let's put this in context. Today, Latinos are more than 1 in 4 of all registered voters in the state of California. But perhaps a better indication of the importance of Latinos to the future of the state resides in this statistic. Currently, 55% of all public school students from kindergarten through 12th grade in the state of California are Latino. Further context, though, suggests why this agenda is being released today. The Latino community in California and nationwide today faces the most blatantly anti-Latino, anti-immigrant presidential administration in the history of this country. Even here in California, which is decidedly different from what it was a quarter of a century ago, we still face obstacles, including, for example, the very recent indication that the first 8 members of the redistricting commission that will draw legislative and congressional lines for the next decade includes not a single Latino or Latina. These challenges present the importance of this policy agenda. The numbers about our population explain why this agenda should not be seen as a request or suggestions, but should be seen as a mandate for the future. Although this was created by an unprecedented coalition of 80 California Latino leaders, it is an agenda that is inclusive for all populations in California and beyond, Latino and non-Latino alike. It is an agenda to ensure that our public policies create equal opportunity for every person to thrive in our society. It's an agenda that should be taken seriously and viewed as a mandate by our policymakers. Together, those 80 leaders have committed to not only put forward this agenda, but to work to ensure that it reflects the future policy of not just this state, but the entire nation. If we needed any more indication of the challenge, we got it a mere 2 days ago, when Donald Trump attempted, unconstitutionally, to seek to discount entirely undocumented immigrants from the count put together by the census to determine the allocation of seats in our House of Representatives. This is a dangerous throwback to the beginnings of our country, when in a constitutional abomination, our initial Constitution decided that Black Americans, enslaved Black Americans, should only count as 3/5 of a person. We see echoes of that in Tuesday's action by Donald Trump, in essence attempting to count so many undocumented immigrants, so many of whom are Latino, as 0/5 of a person. We cannot tolerate that kind of policymaking, and this policy agenda is an attempt to put forward a positive view of the future to ensure that we all have the opportunity in California and beyond to thrive. I'm pleased to join in urging policymakers to take this agenda and put it to work.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sines. I also want to add that the fifth co-chair of this convening, Carmela Castellano Garcia, the president of the California Primary Access to Care and the Castellano Family Foundation, was integral in putting this together. We will now be taking questions from reporters. Please put your questions with your name and your outlet in the chat, and we will triage from there. I'll also note that everybody can access the agenda at latino.ucla.edu, and we'll put the full agenda in the chat as well. Okay, Jeremy White from Politico.
Hey, Assemblywoman Gonzalez and Senator Durazo, thanks for doing this. I have a slightly off-topic question for you two. Legislature is returning to session on Monday. I'm curious to know how you feel about this sort of hectic final stretch of the year, and particularly the balance between staying healthy and passing policy.
I'll go ahead and then pass off to the senator. Look, I feel strongly in our need to go to work. Every day I see essential workers with far less privilege, far less safe workplaces, returning to work, ensuring that we have food on the table and that we have the needs. Our offices are cleaned, our parents are taken care of. And so for us to complain about going back to work in one of the safest work environments in the state, I think is would be presumptuous. We need to get back to pass important legislation that deals with Black Lives Matter, that deals with the inequities that in particular Latinos face in the workplace, that deals with their needs under COVID and beyond, that deals with housing and our need for affordable housing, that deals with climate change, that deals with our rights to vote, and to continue in this state. So we have a job to do. I'm looking forward to it. It'll be abbreviated and fast, but I think we're gonna get some very important legislation out of it. And we owe it to our constituents, we owe it to our community in our state to get back to work.
I totally agree with the chair, but I think really what Californians want, and this is what we're anxious to do, is to address all these issues. And I know the governor, of course, has his role as the executive of branch, but we also have our role. We're a total of 120 legislators from across the state. We know what's happening on the ground. And what's happening on the ground is there's a lot of problems, obviously, with people getting their unemployment checks. People don't qualify for health insurance. We can't even get our seniors, undocumented seniors, to be covered by Medi-Cal. There's workplace issues that are going on, rampant violations. We are anxious to get back to work because those are the things that need to be addressed. And at the same time, we can't just be, addressing issues for right now. We have to address, for example, housing. How do we get out of this housing crisis, not only for what's needed now to address our homeless population, but also how do we build a more affordable housing? That doesn't happen overnight. So we have to do both immediate as well as our long-term needs.
On a level that you clearly don't.
Hi, so next we have Hector Perez Rahman.
Good morning, everyone. Hector Perez Rahman from Radio Lean. I just have two questions. My first one was related to just in general comprehensive immigration reform, and what has this particular group thought about related to comprehensive immigration reform and bridging the not only with the of course the brown immigrant communities, but also with the Black Lives Matter movement when it comes to, in general, the immigration reforms?
Yeah, I can start and then I'll leave it to any of the co-chairs. Part of this exercise was really addressing the lack and dearth of leadership as our nation undergoes tremendous change. And we recognize that we can't do that alone, that it must occur with multiracial, multi-ethnic coalitions. That's particularly true of the Latino community, which at its core has mestizo, indigenous, Afro-Latino roots, etc. As it relates to immigration, we recognize that immigrants come from all walks of life. And you'll see that if you go to any detention center, including Adelanto here in California. But what the leaders of this task force also want to make clear is that when deportations happen, and when enforcement occurs, that overwhelmingly 90% of that is targeted at the Latino community, and that deportations need to cease. We call upon elected leaders after the November election that there is an indefinite moratorium on all deportations, and that we do in fact have comprehensive immigration reform that safeguards family unity as a tenet of any sort of policy. And I'll go ahead and let Senator Durazo or Tom chime in as well.
Maybe Tom can address that.
Sure. So thank you for the question, Hector. I would say what we are seeking is not comprehensive immigration reform, though that I understand is a term that's frequently used. We want progressive immigration reform, and that's a debate that has not yet started in our Congress, and it needs to start. It's our hope that next year we can begin vigorous discussions about what progressive immigration reform means. Initially, we know that it means recognizing the contributions of the millions of people who have built our economy and our society over years and have done so without the full legal protections of the law. We have to provide protection, and we have to provide a pathway to citizenship for those millions of people. In addition, we want to see an immigration system that roots out the discrimination that Sonia has described. And it's not only discrimination in enforcement, where Latinos and, frankly, Black immigrants are overrepresented among those who are targeted for enforcement and deported, but it also means eliminating the outdated national origins quota system, which is what means and who creates the situation where folks from countries with high demand to immigrate, like Mexico, face lengthened waits to obtain a family-based visa to immigrate to this country. That wait can go up to 20 years and longer. And faced with that wait, I think most people would agree, you wouldn't wait to reunite for 20 years, particularly when you know that an immigrant in the same situation from another country only has to wait 4 years to get that visa. We have to change that discrimination in our system. The reason I resist the label comprehensive immigration reform is too often it has included beefing up enforcement measures unnecessarily. We have wasted millions, if not billions of dollars at this point, arming our southern border, building non-existent walls in a fever dream of white nationalists, and frankly, engaging in too much enforcement that results in unnecessary deaths of those who are simply seeking a better life for them and their families. So we need to take those enforcement measures and put them aside and arrive at a progressive immigration reform that recognizes our history as a nation of immigrants and our national values in support of family and in support of non-discrimination.
Let me, if I may, make a couple of comments on adding to what has already been stated. I am a healthcare provider, operate a community health centers throughout Los Angeles and Orange County. This virus doesn't discriminate. It does not discriminate. We knew from the very beginning that this particular virus was going to have severe impact in our communities. And it has. We're the unemployed, the uninsured. We are the undocumented populations. And as I said, it doesn't discriminate. And it hit everyone, but adversely hit our populations. I can think of a whole other way which we can use the billions of dollars that we could have used that are being wasted along the border to be able to provide access to care to all populations, particularly in the pandemic. And earlier on, rather than late, around testing and tracing, those resources could have been aimed at servicing and applying those to the communities that where we see the largest the health inequities in our communities. What is interesting, though, from my own perspective, what we have seen along with issues around public charge, the issues of ICE, the chilling effect that it has had in our populations. Our populations are not coming to the centers and the testing sites. They are now. May have been never too late, but this is something that should have happened way up front in the state of California and nationally. We know that Latino populations, and in particular, the most vulnerable populations are the ones who are most impacted by this virus. And the impact is not just immediate. Yeah, they may be hospitalized, but think about the impact that this will have for generations to come in our communities. So the sort of progressive immigration reform is something that's essential. It's a must in our community. And we look forward to a critical debate around this issue and hopefully a way of being able to take action to impact immigration reform.
Thank you. Next, we have Kim Bojorquez from the SACB and then Kirk Whistler from Latino 247 Media Group.
Hi, could you touch on how this agenda includes increasing Latino voter turnout this election year and the impact it could have?
Yes. Tom, do you want to take it?
Yes, thank you. I think the voting rights portion of this agenda sets forth how we can move forward from what is already one of our best states at attempting to facilitate the registration and participation of all voters. For example, it recognizes that it should be a government responsibility to ensure that we engage in regular voter education. In this particular year, that's important with respect to remote voting, voting by mail. So many of us in the Latino community are used to voting in person, but because of the public health guidelines, we will all be sent a ballot and given the opportunity to vote by mail. It's important that those unfamiliar with doing so get the education and information they need to ensure that sending their vote by mail is a vote that gets counted. That's why that particular recommendation is so important in this 2020 pandemic year. In addition, however, the agenda talks about taking aggressive steps to expand our protection of voting rights in the state of California. That means not only ensuring that everyone has the right to vote, the opportunity to vote, and what they need to actually make their vote count, but it means that their vote will actually count by presenting structures that enable them to elect candidates of choice rather than being regularly outvoted by voters who are not Latino, who do not share their political perspective. So I think the voting rights portion of this agenda is progressive and positive for a state because of great leadership like that of Secretary of State Alex Padilla is already ahead of the curve in ensuring that every person who has the right to vote has the opportunity to vote and to have their vote counted.
Chairperson Gonzalez, do you want to add anything?
No, I think that Tom covered it. This agenda and our builds on the work that we've already done in California. Unlike any other state, everybody will get a ballot. We have automatic registration, which has helped us really close the gap on registration. 2 million new voters in California signed up through the DMV. That's extensive. We have voters who have been able to update their voting address. That's really important in a community like ours where we have a lot of renters, people who move around a lot. They will have their most updated voter registration because of that automatic registration portion of the DMV. Along with that, they'll receive a vote by mail. Every single voter who's registered will receive a mail ballot that has postage paid for. We have done everything we can to ensure that those abilities and those barriers to vote are coming down. And we continue to do that, and that will help the Latino community. But as Tom said, it is our responsibility, and this lays out how we as a government have to make sure that people understand how to make sure that their vote is counted through the vote by mail process. And I think that that's the job that we're going to continue to do this year.
Can I add something, Sonia?
Yes.
I think everything that Tom and Lorena have said are critical, no doubt about it. I think in addition to that, we as a community have to take responsibility and not rely on government to get the word out about the census, about voting and the importance of it. Every small business, every community clinic, every school, and every way that we have contact with our community, it is everyone's responsibility to make sure that we get out to vote. And we know why we have the guy that we do in the White House, and that's because a lot of people didn't vote. And so we have got to do this not as one or two organizations or a few legislators. This has got to be something that the entire community embraces and does with a lot of enthusiasm.
And I'll note that in addition to the voting rights section, part of that was about political representation. Many of the people who participated in this agenda for the last 2 years have been focused on increasing the number of Latino appointments here in California across the executive branch and also our judiciary. The recommendations take that a little further and say that we also need that at the federal level, depending on the outcome of November. We have not seen Latino representation in our appointments, and I recognize that there have been great strides made to hold our corporations in the state accountable to parity and representation. There is more that our governor can do, and certainly the person that occupies the White House. Kirk, it's your floor now.
Yes, thank you very much. And with your the study, it looks like it's got a lot of excellent information in there. I look forward to going over in depth. Would have been helpful if we'd had it a few hours beforehand. But it looks comparable to the type of things that have been presented by the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda in past presidential election years. And the key thing with a document like this, in my mind, is not merely producing it, but getting it into the right hands. How will that happen? In particular, with a campaign like the Biden campaign, that from your study, your office's study before, where it noted that Latinos were not enthused with Biden. They were motivated by Bernie, but there wasn't that turnout, and Biden thus far has not touched substantially on a lot of these issues. So
let me take it. So the UCLA LPPI study looked at Asian American and Latino voting trends and voting preferences in the primary. We found that where Vice President Biden was able to secure a plurality of votes in some jurisdictions, particularly Florida and Texas, Senator Sanders overwhelmingly responded through his campaign tactics that centered on Latino voters and Latino communities to essentially get the majority of votes in places like Iowa, Nevada, and even here in California. One of the reasons that we all got together is the notion that every issue is a Latino issue. And though VP Biden worked with Senator Sanders to create the unity task forces, there was not adequate Latino representation in any of the issue areas except for immigration. And what we sought to do here with this convening was to identify the issues that matter and thinking through the policy reforms that are actually unique, leveraging the great work of the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda, but to also include issues like housing and voting rights, which were not included in the Unity Task Force. I know that Tom Sines is the president of NHLA and would likely like to comment.
Yes, so I'm the current chair of the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda, and I first will point out that NHLA's quadrennial public policy agenda, which was adjusted in light of what we have recently faced in the pandemic, recession, and the Black Lives Matter movement, will be coming out in the next couple of weeks. There will, of course, be strong parallels with the agenda that you are seeing today. But I would emphasize about this agenda that it emanates from California, where Latinos have made great progress in the last quarter of a century. It was only 26 years ago that we faced a governor who put forward Proposition 187, a clearly anti-Latino initiative that then passed with 58% of the vote. And 2 years later, we saw Proposition 209, already mentioned in this presentation. Once more, although Latinos voted no, 76% according to exit polls on Proposition 209, it was enacted by 55% of the California vote. But we've progressed greatly since then, so much that 187 blocked in court. Prop 227, another anti-Latino measure passed in 1998, was recently repealed by voters. And we have this November an opportunity through Proposition 16 to repeal Proposition 209 and reintroduce equal opportunity for all in this state. But that great progress in California is thanks in great part to the work of Latino community members in becoming civically engaged, not just in voting, but in promoting a Latino inclusive agenda. So this agenda from California Latinos, it is our hope, is a shining light, not just for policymakers in this state, but as in so many other ways, we hope and believe that California will be a trendsetter, a harbinger of the future for the rest of the country. We already know we're that in demographics. This policy agenda seeks to see that we are trendsetters when it comes to adopting more inclusive policies for everyone, Latino and non-Latino alike.
No, good job.
Wonderful. Last, we have Rodrigo Dominguez.
Hi, this is Rodrigo Dominguez, Director of Research at UCLA. And I had a question about the next steps that you'll follow with this agenda. How will it be used and what is the plan for it?
Thank you. Counsel, would you like to answer?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
The question was, how is this agenda going to be used and what are the next steps?
This agenda came about as a result of the anger and frustration that many of us felt at the state level and at the local level. We just did not feel that issues that were important to our communities, be one of a multitude of issues that we have discussed here, were not being addressed, were not being prioritized. We saw a parallel here with Black Lives Matter, no different than some of us that participated in that civil rights movement back in the 60s. There was a connection there between the African American or Black community and the Latino brown communities. We came together with common issues at campuses, universities, UCLA and others. We created what ultimately became institutions that continue to be responsive to Latino communities, Latino students, faculty, and others. That coalition allowed us over the course of many years to share with our Black brothers and sisters issues of common concern. Priority for us is to bring our communities closer and to look towards the state and the federal government in ways that we can jointly impact those decisions that are being made about our lives. I think that there's a multitude of different opportunities that we're looking at now, all of which are being explored, and we're certainly open to suggestions and recommendations. The Democratic Convention, the Republican Convention, issues with the Black Caucus, Asian caucuses in Sacramento, working with local officials and the business community as well in trying to move this agenda forward. What we encourage those who are listening to this WebEx is to sign on. We need your help in continuing to raise the voices of the Latino communities, raise them at the level that we believe merit the sort of attention that we believe is necessary to ultimately bring about the institutional changes that will best serve our community.
Thank you. Chairperson Gonzalez?
Thank you. And I think this is important, and there's a reason why we have both the chair and the vice chair of the California Latino Legislative Caucus on here, because we are taking these recommendations, those that we haven't implemented yet, to look at future legislation as well here in California. We feel that California has led the way. But California's Latino Legislative Caucus, just like so many of our national organizations, sometimes gets a little stumped. We all agree primarily on immigration issues, and as a result, we see what we've seen. Presidential candidates will often address immigration issues to a slight attempt, not to the full attempt that we would like, and thinking that's the Latino agenda. The fact is, every issue is a Latino issue, and that's what this study points out. And we need to take that piece by piece by piece, starting here in California, and making sure that we spread that. If it comes to housing, criminal justice, immigration reform's interaction with criminal justice, when it comes to voting rights, when it comes to economic justice issues and the environment, all of these are wrapped up. A lot of times people don't talk about the Latino agenda and think about climate change. We took that on. And if you look at the history in the last few years of Latino legislators, you will see all of these big ideas being pushed by Latino legislators. But even our Latino caucus tends to be thwarted and have an agenda that centers solely around immigration. We're trying to change that. We're pushing that forward so that we can be the model that Thompson said we need to be for the nation. I absolutely believe we can be and we will be. So that's how we're going to use this agenda. We're going to make sure that people understand that the Latino voice, although, and I don't want to say that immigration is not important, it will always be at the foremost of our issues. It is a righteous issue, it's a just issue, and one that we are not giving up on. But that's not enough. And it's time to say that's not enough. We expect not just comprehensive immigration reform, but progressive immigration reform. We expect criminal justice reform. We expect to understand the intersection between economic justice and income inequality that we have not only in this state, but nationwide. And I think that's what we're gonna do with this agenda. We're gonna implement it here in California, and we're gonna spread it like a wonderful, the opposite of COVID, a positive virus across the United States, to ensure that the Latino agenda is picked up by our presidential candidates, people who are running for Congress throughout the United States, and here at home in California.
Thank you so much. And the last word from Senator Durazo, and I'll remind everybody that you have our contact information on the press release for any follow-up. Senator?
Thank you. I just want to remind everyone as well that a big part of the reason that California is in leadership role across the country is because what Latinos and immigrants have done to strengthen the labor movement. And the labor movement, with its resources across the board, no matter what kind of career you have, what kind of job, what kind of industry, have really pushed forward these kinds of progressive changes together. And so this is something that this agenda includes, which is strengthening the labor movement, strengthening the rights of workers, especially low-wage and immigrant workers, that they can be part of a movement. They're not excluded. And I think that's the message here across the board, is that we're all going to be included in every single one of these issues. So thank you very much, Sonia.
Thank you all. I really appreciate it. Be safe. And the agenda is available at latino.ucla.edu. Take good care.
Thank you.